The last thing I saw of my son, Michael, was the crimson glow of his taillights vanishing between the tall pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He didn't have the decency to watch me in the rearview mirror as he drove off, leaving his 64-year-old mother on the shoulder of a deserted Forest Service road, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart that had just been detonated into a million icy fragments. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and click the bell. We have new stories every day. Like and comment which city you're watching from. You think you know your children. You believe, down to the marrow in your bones, that the bond between a mother and her child is absolute, unbreakable. I believed that. I was a naive fool. My son, my Mikey, drove me 3 hours from home under the pretense of a surprise trip to a rustic wellness retreat, a place he said would remind me of the camping trips his father and I used to take. He stopped the car, told me he heard a strange ticking sound from the engine, and then simply got back in and left me for dead. He did it for money. $5 million. Money my late husband, his father, had worked his whole life for. Money he left for me, for our family's security. Michael chose shiny new cars and a life of luxury over the woman who gave him life itself. He didn't count on me surviving. He didn't count on me clawing my way out of that wilderness with a new kind of fire burning in my soul. And he sure as hell didn't count on me coming back for him. This isn't just a story about survival. This is the story of my revenge. The sun was already bleeding through the canopy, painting the autumn sky in cruel, magnificent streaks of orange and violet. Soon it would be dark. Soon, the mountain cold would descend. My first instinct was primal, a raw animal urge to sprint after the car, to scream his name until my lungs tore. But my legs, old and stiff, wouldn't cooperate. I was frozen to the spot, a pathetic monument to betrayal. The small duffel bag I'd packed for the retreat, a new novel, my favorite cable-knit sweater, a framed photo of him and his wife Jessica on their wedding day, sat in the dirt beside me. He'd taken it out of the trunk for me before he drove away. A final, polite, monstrous gesture. Mikey, I whispered to the empty road. The name tasted like poison. Panic is a waste of energy. My husband, Frank, had been a Marine, a man of unshakable logic. Panic is a mutiny in your own skull, Carol, he used to tell me. It makes you surrender your most valuable weapon, your mind. His voice, a ghost I clung to, was a shock of ice water. I sucked in a deep, ragged breath. I was Carol Ann Thompson. I had raised a son while working 2 jobs. I had nursed my husband through his final, brutal illness, and I had buried the love of my life without collapsing. I would not be defeated by a spineless man-child and a patch of wilderness. The cold was the immediate threat. My jacket was sensible, but it wasn't rated for a night in the Appalachians in late October. The temperature was plummeting. Shelter. I scanned the woods, a dense, unforgiving wall of trees. To stay by the road was to bank on the slim hope of a passing car, but it was also to remain exposed. A forest, Frank had taught me on those camping trips Michael so cruelly invoked, offers resources if you know how to read it. I picked up my bag, a useless token of a life that no longer existed, and walked to the tree line. My joints protested, my stamina a pale shadow of what it once was. Every step required conscious effort. I needed a plan. Water. That was priority 1. I stood perfectly still, closing my eyes and listening past the rustle of dry leaves and the groan of ancient branches. And there it was, almost imperceptible, the gentle murmur of running water. I plunged into the undergrowth, branches clawing at my face and snatching at my hair. The forest floor was a minefield of hidden roots and slick, mossy rocks. I moved slowly, deliberately, conserving what little energy I had. The sound of the creek grew louder, a siren song of survival. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a small clearing. A narrow stream, its water dark and shockingly clear, cut a path through the landscape. I knelt, my knees groaning, and scooped the frigid water into my cupped hands. It was the most exquisite thing I had ever tasted. I drank until my teeth throbbed with the cold. And as I drank, my mind finally started to connect the dots, replaying the last few days, seeing with blinding clarity the warning signs I had willfully ignored. The conversation a week ago. I'd stopped by their condo to drop off a homemade apple pie. Michael and Jessica were in the kitchen, their voices low, coiled with a tension that I mistaken for simple stress. "It needs to happen soon, Mikey," she'd hissed. Her voice, usually so saccharine and bright, was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "The bank has called 3 times this week. These people, they aren't sending polite reminders anymore." "But it's my mom, Jess," he'd whined, his voice lacking all conviction. "That inheritance is hers. We can't just, "It's our money," she'd snapped back. "Your father would have wanted us to be secure, to build our future. She's old, Michael. What on earth is she going to do with $5 million? Let it sit in a low-interest savings account? We need a fresh start. California, maybe. Away from all this." There was a long pause. I heard Michael exhale, a sound of utter surrender. "What do you want me to do?" "I have an idea," she had said, her voice dropping into a conspiratory whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up even then. "It's gentle, in its own way. A nice trip to a quiet place where she can rest for good." At the time, my heart had broken for them. I assumed they were drowning in debt. I thought her idea was to ask me for a significant loan, and I'd already decided I would give it to them, no questions asked. The phrase "for good" had skipped right over me, a dark joke I didn't get. The monumental ignorance of a mother's love. She hadn't been planning to ask me for my help. She had been planning my murder. The last of the sun vanished, and a profound, chilling darkness claimed the forest. A coyote yipped in the distance, a lonely hunting sound that vibrated deep in my chest. This was no wellness retreat. This was a tomb, and I had been escorted here by my only child. That's when the anger started to burn, a clean, white-hot fire in my gut that vaporized the fear and the cold. It was a new source of energy, sharp and powerful. They thought I was a doddering old woman, a fragile antique who would just lie down, curl up, and quietly expire. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten who I was. I was the daughter of a West Virginia coal miner and a woman who ran a farm practically by herself. I was the wife of a man who saw combat and never flinched. And I was the mother of a traitor. I got to my feet. My body was a symphony of aches, but my will was forged iron. I started walking, following the downstream flow, one hand tracing the rough bark of the trees for balance. The stream was my guide. It had to lead somewhere. A river, a lake, eventually another road. The night was absolute, a thick, suffocating blackness. I stumbled on, navigating by sound and touch alone. I tore a strip of fabric from the silk lining of my jacket and tied it around a low-hanging branch every 100 paces or so, creating a trail for myself in the dark. My mind was no longer grieving, it was calculating. I needed to vanish, for real. When Michael and Jessica filed a missing person report, a move they would surely make to build their alibi, they would paint the picture of a sweet, slightly confused old woman with early signs of dementia who had wandered away. The sheriff's department would search, of course, but this national forest was immense.
After a few days of fruitless searching, I would become a file in a cabinet. A sad story. Another case gone cold. This was to my advantage. They needed to believe I was dead. They needed to feel secure. They needed to cash the check. Because when they were comfortable, basking in their new blood-soaked life, that's when the ghost would return. Not as Carol Thompson, the loving mother, but as a reckoning. Hours passed. My legs felt like lead. Then I saw it. A faint, man-made angle against the star-dusted charcoal sky. A roofline. I crept forward, my heart pounding. It was a small, ramshackle structure, barely more than a shed. A hunting cabin. Abandoned years ago by the look of it. The door was off its hinges, and the roof was pockmarked with holes. But it was shelter. I nudged the splintered door open and slipped inside. The air was thick with mildew and mice. A sliver of moonlight through a hole in the roof illuminated the grim interior. A simple wooden table, a single broken chair, and a rusted pot-bellied stove. In the corner lay a pile of grimy burlap sacks. It was a hovel, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I dragged the sacks to the corner farthest from the leaky roof and collapsed on them, my body racked with shivers I could no longer control. Lying there in the oppressive dark, listening to the strange clicks and whispers of the forest, a single hot tear cut a path through the dirt on my cheek. It was not a tear of grief. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated rage. "You will pay for this, Michael," I whispered to the shadows. "You and that black widow spider you married. I swear on your father's memory, you will pay." The forest could keep its secrets. For now, so would I. My name was Carol Ann Thompson, and this wasn't my grave. It was my training ground. In the days that followed, that decrepit cabin became my fortress. The shock subsided, replaced by a steely, methodical routine. Each day was a small war for survival, and every minor victory fueled the fire of my resolve. I was not a victim. I was a strategist. I found a rusty axe head beneath the rotten floorboards, and using a solid branch and strips of nylon from my duffel bag, fashioned a crude but serviceable hatchet. I spent my days gathering and chopping firewood. The old stove was a wreck, but I cleaned out the nests and rust and managed to get a draft going. The first night I coaxed a small, smoky fire to life was a revelation. The warmth was a physical blessing, but the light was a spiritual one. It was my small candle of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. Food was a constant struggle. I had a handful of granola bars in my bag, which I rationed with military discipline. It wouldn't be enough. I forced myself to remember things Frank had taught me, facts that I had filed away as useless trivia. I recognized wild blackberries, shriveled but edible on their thorny vines. I dug up cattail roots from the muddy banks of the creek, boiling them into a bland but filling paste. One triumphant afternoon, I managed to corner a small trout in a shallow eddy and catch it with my bare hands. I cooked it over the fire on a flat rock, and that simple, unseasoned meal was more satisfying than the finest restaurant dinner. My body, which I had started to see as a slow betrayal of aches and weaknesses, began to respond. The physical labor of hauling water, chopping wood, and foraging miles each day hardened my muscles and sharpened my senses. My mind, freed from the meaningless noise of modern life, became a precision instrument, honed to a single gleaming point: justice. One afternoon, while searching further afield, I found it. Tucked inside an old rotted log was an old oilskin pouch. Inside was a U.S. Geological Survey map of the area, brittle and yellowed with age. My hand shook as I carefully unfolded it. I found my creek, a thin blue line weaving through the dense contour lines of the mountains. My finger traced its path. It fed into a larger river, and roughly 9 miles from my cabin, the river flowed under a bridge marked as a state highway. It was an escape route. But not yet. The plan was solidifying. It was no longer about simple revenge. It was about deconstruction. Michael and Jessica needed to feel my absence as a permanent reality. I pictured them putting on a performance for the police, for concerned neighbors. Jessica, the grieving daughter-in-law, a pillar of strength. Michael, hollowed out and distraught, earning the pity of everyone who saw him. They would be working on accessing the money. Frank had put everything in a trust. Upon certification of my death, the entire estate would pass to Michael. A death certificate would be difficult without a body, but there are legal loopholes, declarations of presumed death for a missing person. Jessica would know them all. She was a paralegal, smart, vicious. She had masterminded this whole thing. She saw my son's weakness as a tool and my love as a liability. She had convinced him that my death was not an ending, but a transaction that would fund their beginning.
But I would not be the foundation they built their new life on. I would be the earthquake that brought it all down. I spent 21 days in that forest. I became gaunt, my face a roadmap of scratches and sun exposure, my hands raw and calloused, but my eyes had a new light in them, a hard, cold glint that felt entirely foreign. On the 21st day, I knew it was time. I packed my meager possessions, the map, a tin can I used for boiling water, and my hatchet. I put out the fire, a silent thank you to the cabin that had been my salvation. The 9-mile hike was grueling. Every muscle screamed, but the image of Jessica's smug smile pushed me forward. It was late afternoon when I finally heard it, the telltale rumble of a semi-truck on pavement. A few minutes later, I saw it, the gray stripe of the highway, a concrete bridge over the river. Civilization. I emerged from the woods looking like something from a horror movie. My clothes were shredded and stained, my hair was a wild, matted mess. I waited, hiding behind a tree, until I saw an old pickup truck approaching. I stepped out onto the shoulder and raised a trembling hand. The driver, a burly man in a flannel shirt with a kind, craggy face, hit his brakes, his eyes widening. "Good Lord, ma'am," he said, rolling down his window. "Are you all right? What on earth happened to you?" I fed him the story I had practiced. A church group bus trip. I'd stepped into the woods to find a private spot, gotten turned around, and the bus had left me behind. I was just a confused, slightly embarrassed old lady. He believed every word. His face filled with pity as he helped me into the warm cab, offering me a thermos of coffee and half of his tuna sandwich. I accepted with a gratitude that was almost painful. He was headed to a small town about 30 miles down the road. Perfect. I needed an anonymous place to land, a place to gather my resources. I told him I had a cousin in this town, giving him a fake name. He dropped me at the Greyhound station, wished me well, and pressed a $20 bill into my hand. "For your ticket home, ma'am," he said. I watched him drive off. The first phase was over. I had survived. I was out. I was a ghost. And now the haunting would begin. I found a rundown motel on the edge of the town and paid for one night in cash. The shower was a baptism. As I washed away 3 weeks of dirt, sweat, and despair, I felt as if I was scouring away my old self, the soft, trusting Carol Thompson. The woman who looked back from the steamy mirror was a stranger. Leaner, tougher, her gaze sharp and unsettlingly clear. I used the last of my money to buy a pair of jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cheap burner phone from the thrift store. There was only one person on this earth I could call. One person who would believe my insane story without question, and who possessed the quiet, methodical brilliance I now needed. I dialed the number I knew by heart. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" "Sharon," I said, my voice raw and unfamiliar even to myself. "It's Carol." A heavy silence crackled over the line. Sharon Miller had been my best friend since we were cashiers at the same grocery store 40 years ago. A retired CPA, meticulous to a fault, and fiercely loyal. She thought I was dead. "Carol? Carol Ann Thompson? Oh my God, is that you? Where are you? We've all been sick with worry. The police are looking, the volunteers. Michael has been an absolute wreck." A wreck. The word was so absurd I almost laughed. "He's a better actor than I thought, Sherry. Listen to me. Listen very carefully. I am not okay, and I cannot go to the police. I need your help. Can you meet me? And you cannot tell a single living soul you've heard from me. Do you understand? Especially not my darling son." There was a beat of silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in her hyper-logical brain. She knew me. She knew I wasn't given to theatrics. "Tell me where," she said, finally, her voice stripped of all emotion, replaced by something much more useful. Cold, hard resolve. The war had just begun. 2 days later, I was sitting in a worn vinyl booth in a 24-hour diner off an interstate 90 miles from my home. The place smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was the perfect, anonymous purgatory for a ghost to meet the living. I watched the door, my heart a trip hammer against my ribs. I had dressed in my thrift store jeans and sweatshirt, and with my hair scraped back and my face still gaunt, I hardly recognized myself. This was a good thing. A ghost needs to be unrecognizable. When Sharon walked in, her eyes scanned the diner, searching for the friend she knew. They passed right over me twice before a flicker of familiarity made her stop. She stared, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and tailored blazer a stark contrast to my disheveled state. Her face, usually so composed, crumpled with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and horror. "Carol, Carol," she whispered, sliding into the booth opposite me. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered over mine before finally gripping it. Her skin was warm, the first friendly human touch I had felt since my son hugged me goodbye before leaving me to die. "My God, Carol, what have they done to you?" I didn't cry. The tears had been burned out of me in the forest, replaced by something colder, harder. Over the next hour, fueled by endless cups of bitter coffee, I told her everything. I laid out the story in a flat, emotionless voice that made the details even chillinger. The surprise retreat, the ticking sound in the engine, the crimson taillights disappearing into the trees, the endless nights, the cold, the hunger. I told her about Michael's final courteous act of putting my bag on the ground beside me. Cher listened, her expression shifting from horrified sympathy to a quiet, incandescent fury. She was a woman of numbers and logic, an accountant who had spent her life making sure everything balanced. The injustice of my story, the sheer monstrous imbalance of it, offended her to her core. "That viper," she breathed, her knuckles white as she gripped her coffee cup. "Michael, he was always weak, Carol. You know that. But he wasn't born a monster. She made him one." "A weak man is the most dangerous tool," I said, the words feeling ancient and true. "He wanted the money, Valya. He made his choice." "So what now?" she asked, her gaze sharpening. This was where she came alive, not in the emotional aftermath, but in the practical, tactical response. "You can't go to the police. It's your word against theirs. They'll have him evaluated by a psychiatrist who will say he's crippled by grief. They'll bring up your age. They'll subtly suggest you're confused, that you wandered off, and your ordeal has muddled your memory. They'll turn you into the villain." "I know," I said. "That's why I called you. I'm not going to the police. Police means courts and lawyers. I'm not interested in justice. I'm interested in payback." A slow smile spread across Sharon's face, a chilling sight. "Good," she said, "'cause I don't balance the books. I cook them." Sharon's home was my new sanctuary. A neat-as-a-pin suburban house with a garden full of roses, it became our war room. While I regained my physical strength, eating real food and sleeping in a real bed, we began to formulate our plan. Sharon turned her home office, with its dual monitors and shredder, into our command center. "First intelligence," she announced, pulling up a chair for me. "We need to know exactly what they're doing. We need to see their state of mind, their expenditures, their every move." It was nauseatingly easy. Jessica was a chronic oversharer on social media. Her profiles, which I had previously scrolled past with affectionate indulgence, were now enemy intelligence. Sharon pulled up Jessica's Instagram page. My breath caught in my throat. There they were, a post from 2 weeks ago, just a week after Michael had left me in the mountains. A picture of the two of them clinking champagne glasses on a restaurant patio. The caption read, "Trying to find moments of light in the darkness. My husband is my rock. We'll get through this." Michael's smile in the photo was a strained, hollow thing, but Jessica's was radiant, triumphant. The comments were a cascade of pity and support. "So strong! Praying for you both, thinking of you and your poor mother." "The public performance," Sharon muttered with disgust. We kept scrolling. A week after the champagne, there was a new post. A picture of a brand new, gleaming white luxury SUV with a giant red bow on the hood, parked in their condo's designated spot. A little retail therapy to lift our spirits. Frank always loved a good American car. We know he and Mom are smiling down on us. The audacity was like a physical blow. To invoke my husband's name, to use his memory to justify her greed. I had to look away from the screen, my hands clenched into fists. They hadn't even waited. The money from Frank's life insurance, the initial payout while the rest of the estate was in limbo, was already being spent. "We need to see their finances," Sharon said, her voice like ice. "Do you have online access to any of your old bank accounts? A joint credit card, maybe?" I did. An old credit card account that I had kept open for emergencies, with Michael listed as an authorized user. I hadn't used it in years, but I'd never closed it. I gave Sharon the login information. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The statement loaded on the screen. A ledger of my own betrayal. Tens of thousands of dollars, charges at designer boutiques in the city, a down payment on the SUV, a $5,000 charge at an upscale travel agency, and then there it was, a recurring charge. $200 every Tuesday to a Dr. Alistair Finch, grief counseling. "He's seeing a shrink," I whispered. "Good," Sharon said grimly. "It means he has a conscience. It's buried deep under a mountain of Jessica's ambition, but it's there. And that's our weapon. We can't get to her. She feels no shame, but him. We can get to him." The next phase of my transformation was physical. We drove to a city 100 miles away where no one would know me. In the back room of a dingy salon, a woman with bored eyes chopped off my long gray hair, the hair Michael used to braid when he was a little boy. We dyed what was left a sensible, anonymous brown. At a discount store, I bought new clothes. Dark pants, simple tops, practical shoes. Nothing like the cheerful cardigans and floral dresses I used to wear. I bought reading glasses with a different shaped frame. When I looked in the mirror, Carol Thompson was gone. In her place was a thin, tired-looking woman you would never look at twice. The perfect disguise. Back at the war room, Sharon made the most critical discovery. Using a legal database she still had access to, she searched the local court records. "Found it," she said, her voice tight. "Michael Thompson has petitioned the Superior Court to have Carol Ann Thompson declared legally deceased, filed a week ago." She read from the document. "After an extensive search and rescue operation failed to find any trace, given her age and recent self-reported periods of memory loss, the family has been forced to accept the tragic reality." "Self-reported memory loss?" I asked, aghast. "I've never reported anything of the sort." "He's lying, Carol," Sharon said, her eyes flashing. "They're building a narrative. He's telling the court you were becoming senile. It justifies you wandering off. It makes their story airtight. With a death certificate, the trust dissolves, and the entire $5 million transfers directly into his name. It's clean. It's legal. It's perfect. My own son was painting me as a doddering old fool to get his hands on my money. The humiliation was as sharp as the betrayal. They weren't just killing me. They were erasing the person I had been." For 2 more weeks, we watched. We learned their routines. Michael went to work at his architecture firm, his posture more stooped each day. Jessica quit her paralegal job to become a full-time lady of leisure, documenting her shopping trips and spa days online. They were planning a trip, a month-long cruise through the Mediterranean, leaving in 6 weeks' time, their fresh start. "We have to act before they leave the country," I said. My voice was steady, my heart a block of ice. Once they're gone, they might never come back. It was time to plant the first seed. The plan needed to be subtle, a psychological splinter they couldn't quite locate. It had to be something that spoke directly to Michael, a message from a ghost only he could hear. I remembered a camping trip when Michael was 10. He'd gotten terribly lost for a few hours. We were all frantic. When Frank finally found him, he was sitting by a stream crying, clutching a smooth gray river stone with a perfect white ring around it. He'd kept that stone on his dresser for years, calling it his lucky compass rock. I knew he still had it. I'd seen it in a small dish on his bedside table the last time I was in their condo. I described the stone to Sharon. "What kind of flower grows by those streams up there, in the fall?" I thought for a moment. "I think they're called ghost pipes. Strange, pale white flowers that look almost like clay. Frank said they only grow in the darkest parts of the forest." An hour later, Sharon, using her credit card and a VPN to hide her location, had ordered a single, perfectly crafted, artificial ghost pipe flower from an artisanal maker on Etsy. She had it sent via anonymous courier service to their condo. No box, just the single, waxy white flower in a simple envelope with no return address. The delivery was scheduled on a Tuesday, the same day as Michael's grief counseling. The day it was delivered, we watched Jessica's social media like hawks. Nothing. The day was filled with her usual posts, a new handbag, a fancy lunch. There was no mention of the strange delivery. That meant she either hadn't seen it or didn't understand its significance. But Michael would. Our confirmation came 3 days later. A new charge appeared on the credit card statement. A $50 copay for an unscheduled emergency session with Dr. Alistair Finch. "Bullseye," Sharon said with a grim smile. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small, cold flicker of satisfaction. He was rattled. The foundation was cracking. This was not the end. It wasn't even the beginning of the end, but it was the end of his piece. The ghost was in the machine now, and I was just getting started. The single white flower was a pebble dropped into the still dark pond of Michael's guilt. Now it was time to create some ripples.
For the next month, we executed a campaign of psychological warfare so subtle, so intimate, that it could only be interpreted as a haunting. Our weapons weren't threats or violence, they were memories, my memories. Every week, a new ghost appeared. We sent an old, out-of-print copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer to his office, purchased from a used bookstore 1,000 miles away and mailed with a forged postmark. It was the book I used to read to him every night, his worn-out childhood copy still sitting on a shelf in my, now empty, house. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. A week later, using a simple scent diffuser ordered online, we had the faint aroma of my signature almond and vanilla perfume, a scent I had worn for 30 years, misted into the ventilation system of their condo's parking garage, timed for when he would be arriving home from work. It would be just a hint, a phantom scent that would cling to the air for a moment before vanishing, making him question his own senses. Each delivery, each strange occurrence, was followed by a frantic spike in their spending, another emergency session with Dr. Finch, an extravagant "we deserve this" weekend trip to a spa in the mountains, documented with aggressively cheerful photos by Jessica. Her social media was becoming a performance of desperate happiness. They were a couple fighting against a shadow, and it was costing them. The credit card was our lifeline, our direct feed into their deteriorating mental state. We saw the charges for expensive dinners they could barely enjoy, the boutique purchases that offered fleeting distraction, but Sharon, with her accountant's eye for detail, saw something more. She noticed a pattern. Small, regular cash withdrawals from ATMs near Michael's office. $100 here, $200 there. Always on a Thursday afternoon. "She's hiding something from her," Sharon said, pointing to the screen. "Jessica's charges are loud and proud. His are these little whispers. He's squirreling away cash." The ultimate target was the trust. Frank had set it up with his usual military precision. $5 million invested in a conservative portfolio, managed by his old army buddy and trusted financial advisor, a man named George Coleman. We needed to sever access to it before he and Jessica could drain it and disappear. We couldn't approach George directly. He believed me to be dead. We had to create a situation where George himself would question the official story. This was my part of the plan. It was the riskiest but most crucial move. It required me to step out of the shadows. We chose the day carefully. It was the anniversary of Frank's death. I knew Michael and Jessica would visit his grave. It was part of their performance of the grieving family. Sharon dropped me off 2 blocks from the cemetery. I was dressed in my anonymous uniform, a simple dark coat and a scarf covering most of my face. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I watched from a distance, hidden behind an old oak tree, as they arrived. Jessica laid a garish bouquet of flowers store-bought on the headstone. Michael just stood there, his shoulders slumped, a hollowed-out man. He looked older, thinner. My ghost was eating him from the inside out. They stayed for 10 minutes, a pantomime of sorrow, before leaving. This was my chance. I had with me a single perfect red rose, the same kind I had placed on Frank's grave every year on the state. Tucked into the rose was a tiny, almost invisible listening device Sharon had ordered from a spy shop website. It was our Trojan horse. I walked to the grave, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Being there, seeing the cold granite with my husband's name etched into it, nearly broke me. I wanted to collapse, to scream my pain and betrayal to the heavens, but I held it together. I replaced Jessica's ostentatious bouquet with my single rose, nestling the listening device deep within the petals. Then I walked away without looking back. Back in the war room, we listened. For hours, all we heard was the whisper of the wind and the distant sound of traffic. Then, late in the afternoon, we heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. It was Michael. He had come back, alone. We heard him sigh, a long, ragged sound. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I messed up. I messed up so bad. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She said it would be a kindness, a gentle passing in a peaceful place. She said Mom wouldn't suffer. But she's not at peace. I know she's not. She's still here. She's everywhere. I don't know what to do. He started to sob. Ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of a man broken by his own weakness. And in that moment, for the first time, a sliver of pity pierced through my icy rage. He was still my son, but he had made his bed. "It's the money, Dad," he continued. His voice choked. "It's all about the money. Jessica's already booked the tickets to Spain. As soon as the trust clears, we're gone, leaving everything behind. She says it's a new start, but it feels like the end of the world." He sniffled. "I wish I could talk to you. I wish I could talk to Mom. I'd give it all back, every penny, just to hear her voice again." Sharon clicked the record button. She said softly, "We've got him."
We had his confession, his motive, his accomplice's plan. We now had a new target for the recording, George Coleman. George was a man of old-school honor. Sharon composed an anonymous email sent from an encrypted address. The subject line was simply, "Frank Thompson." The body of the email was brief. "Mr. Coleman, your client, Frank Thompson, trusted you implicitly. His primary directive for his estate was the care and well-being of his wife, Carol. I believe Frank's wishes are about to be violated. Before you authorize the final transfer of the Thompson Trust to his son Michael, I urge you to listen to the attached audio file. It was recorded today at Frank's grave. Some ghosts speak." We attached the audio file and hit send. Then we waited. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. On the second day, Sharon's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She put it on speaker. "Hello?" A gruff, serious voice responded. "My name is George Coleman. I am calling from an untraceable number in response to an email I received. I have listened to your recording. Who is this?" My heart stopped. "It's Carol, George," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. There was a sharp intake of breath, a long, stunned silence. "Carol? My God, it can't be. We thought you were—" Michael said— "Michael lied, and now he's about to steal my husband's legacy, your client's legacy. Will you help me stop him?" The line was silent for another 10 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was pure steel. "Tell me what you need me to do." The final act was set in motion. The court hearing to declare me legally deceased and finalize the trust transfer was scheduled for the following Monday. Michael and Jessica believed this was the final step before their glorious escape. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. Sharon and I arrived at the courthouse early. We didn't go into the courtroom. We sat in a small waiting area down the hall, out of sight. I looked like an ordinary woman waiting for jury duty. A few minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin, George Coleman arrived, a formidable figure in a tailored suit, carrying a heavy briefcase. He gave us a brief, almost imperceptible nod as he walked past. Then Michael and Jessica arrived. She was dressed in a chic, somber navy blue dress, the picture of elegant grief. Michael was a mess, his suit rumpled, his face ashen. He was a man being dragged to his own execution. They walked into the courtroom, holding hands, ready for their final performance. We couldn't see what was happening inside, but we had a feed. Sharon had a pen in her pocket that was transmitting audio to a tiny receiver in Sharon's ear. She gave me the play-by-play in a quiet whisper. The judge began the proceedings, a formality. He asked Michael to confirm his identity and the nature of his petition. Jessica squeezed his hand. Then George Coleman stood up. "Your Honor, as the trustee of the Thompson estate, I have new information that is critically relevant to this case." He played the recording. Through the receiver, I heard my son's desperate, sobbing confession echo through the quiet courtroom. I heard his words about Jessica, about the trip to Spain, about his guilt. A gasp went through the room. I heard Jessica's sharp whisper, "Michael, what is this?" followed by the judge calling for order. When the recording ended, there was a dead silence. "Your Honor," George said, his voice booming with authority, "as you have just heard, this is not a simple case of a man grieving his lost mother. This is a case of fraud, and I believe conspiracy and attempted murder. The petition to have Carol Thompson declared dead is based on a deliberate and malicious lie. And I have one more piece of evidence. A surprise witness who can attest to this fact firsthand. He looked toward the courtroom door. The trustee calls Carol Ann Thompson to the stand. That was my cue. Sharon squeezed my arm. I stood up and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Every step felt momentous, a step back into my own life. I pushed the door open and entered the courtroom. Every head turned. The collective gasp was audible. Jessica's face went chalk white, her mouth falling open in a perfect O of horrified disbelief. Michael stared at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost pitiful. He looked at me as if he was seeing what I had always claimed I to be, a ghost. He shrank back in his chair, a cornered animal. I walked slowly, deliberately to the witness stand. My gaze never left my son's face. I didn't look at him with hatred. I looked at him with a vast, chilling emptiness that was far more damning. The love I had for him, the lifeblood of our relationship for 40 years, was gone, and he could see it. He could see the void he had created. I didn't need to say much. My presence was my testimony. The court descended into chaos. The case was immediately halted, and a criminal investigation was launched on the spot. Jessica, ever the survivor, began shouting immediately, pointing a shaking finger at Michael. It was him. It was all his idea. He was in debt. He was desperate. He forced me to go along with it. But it was too late. The recording, Michael's weak denials, and my very much alive presence had sealed their fates. They were both taken into custody. I learned later from the detectives about the Thursday cash withdrawals. Michael hadn't been squirreling money away for himself. He had been donating it in cash to the search and rescue organization that had conducted the futile search for me in the mountains. Small, pathetic acts of penance. His conscience wasn't just a flicker. It was a slow, agonizing burn. In the end, it was Jessica who was deemed the architect of the plot. Faced with overwhelming evidence and her husband's eventual full confession, she was sentenced to 25 years to life. Michael, for his cooperation and demonstrable remorse, received a lesser sentence of 10 years. He never once tried to contact me from prison. The message in my eyes that day in court had been clear. He was no longer my son. The boy I had raised was as dead as I was supposed to be. I reclaimed my life, my home, my name. The $5 million, Frank's legacy, was secure. But I never saw it as money. I saw it as a weapon that had been turned against me and that I had reclaimed. With Sharon and George's help, I set up a foundation in Frank's name dedicated to supporting elderly individuals who are victims of financial abuse and exploitation. My survival had to mean something more than just revenge. Sometimes late at night, I sit in my quiet house and think about that woman in the woods, the one who was cold and terrified and fighting for her life. She seems like a different person, a character in a story. But she is me. She is the iron in my soul. I learned in that forest that a person can endure the unimaginable. I learned that the deepest betrayals come from those you love the most. And I learned that a mother's love, when it dies, can be the coldest, most unforgiving thing on earth. My son drove away, but in the end, it was I who truly disappeared, and the woman who came back would never be lost again.
So, another story of my grandmother has end, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.